boxing with Big Dog and Dakota, or some people say boxing with Dakota and the Big Dog. Who knows what it is? Little off schedule this past week. I basically worked 10 to 12 straight days. Hopefully the content machine will be getting back going, because if I work every day except for one, that's not enough. I need about 2 days off to keep the machine going, or else it can't run. Somewhat back to our usual schedule. Dakota, I know we were a little off yesterday. That's completely my fault once again. But what are your thoughts on Gabriela Fundora, her potential? For those that didn't see the fight, I'll give you a breakdown. She fought a qualified #1 contender and basically did what you've come to expect from her. She outclasses her, beats her up, and then stops her. And then did a dance I kind of liked, where it kind of expressed like her swag. Like it kind of was like yeah, I just beat her up. Definitely feel that she's the meaner of the two. That's just something I pick up on, it that she's a little meaner than Sebastian. What are your takeaways? Because I think that after Katie, I think my guy Boxer Gray said this, but I think after Katie Taylor and Amanda fight, they're probably done. Like I don't see them doing another fight after that. We're not that far away from Fundora being the best women's fighter, or in the conversation of being the best.
Yeah, I think that there is kind of a generation of female fighters that is at least in the back nine, right? So it's at some point this batch that includes Gabriela Fundora is going to kind of step to the front. But man, she is special. Like the Viddal, I was very impressed early on with how slippery she was. There was a lot of good head movement. But Gabriela's just got a way of staying within herself and not overreaching and not getting impatient. And she just let herself settle into the fight and put a beat down on a fighter that otherwise seemed really difficult to hit and difficult to be in there with. And she made it look easy. And that's kind of what great fighters do.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to imagine a fighter who can beat her if they don't just like outslug her, catch her with a shot, or just have her number in some capacity. But I'm not really seeing the formula just yet to beating her.
Right. Well, because we haven't, other than really, I guess, the Christina Cruz fight, we haven't seen a whole lot of legitimate resistance. I mean, the Cruz fight, I remember being close at the time of the stoppage, and we got to see her in with somebody who had a little more experience and a little more IQ. But I'm not sure who else would be that. And again, that didn't work. She wound up stopping Cruz. So there isn't a blueprint. There isn't a formula. Really, because there's been so few even vulnerable moments.
Yeah, and it sucks, right? And shout out to everybody that just joined in. We got a bunch of people. Hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the way we look, and also side piece if you like the way we talk about boxing, but mostly if you like the way we look. Hit the subscribe button, because that's what we're doing. We're kind of doing superficial boxing talk. We kind of throw the substance to the side. We are talking about
hot boy shit.
Yeah, we're doing Gabriela Fundora. If we were to, like, this is the problem with great performances against unknown opponents, and we're going to talk about the opposite of this in the co-feature, is there's not really much to talk about, right? So we have to kind of workshop a segment more so about who are the 5 best women's fighters in the world, more so than talking about the skill set she demonstrated. Because if we talk about the skill set she demonstrated, people go, well, who did she fight? But I was, like you said, I was impressed with her composure. To me, she showed that she's not just a slugger. There was a level of intellect. There was a level of thinking to this. And there's a level of meanness. I'm going to keep going back to it. There's a level of meanness that's almost like Margarito to me, where when she has people hurt, she stalks and chases, and she likes looking for the finish.
Totally. And I think that, there's been other champions, not even just female champions, who have experienced stretches like this, right? Like Sergio Martinez made a bunch of defenses against really tough guys that didn't have big name recognition, especially in the States. And, when the big fights came with Paul Williams and whatever, those were his big highlights, Chavez Jr. But a lot of those defenses were just hard workman-like fights, that boxing fans are the ones, that appreciate them. And I think when people act like it's a big mystery, who's she going to fight? Well, why don't you just go check the rankings at 112 and look at who the top 5 is at each weight, at each belt. And that's probably who she's going to fight. I think it'll be that simple. And at some point she'll go up in weight and there'll be an opponent, of a higher stature in terms of popularity. And that'll be a massive fight. I'm not sure who that is, but I do think that'll happen.
I'm not trying to speak out of turn, but I think we're looking at someone with the potential of being a 4, 5, or 6 division world champion.
Sure, why not? I mean, she's got the frame to, at a minimum, be a featherweight. I don't see why she couldn't go higher if she didn't want to.
Yeah, so I think it's very, very promising, her potential. If we're going to talk about the best women's boxers in the world, the most accomplished, I think Claressa Shields is obviously on that list. Serrano and Katie Taylor. On social media, I only have Twitter currently, so I just see the Twitter. They did a Mount Rushmore, which basically was just to piss people off. I guess you could throw Alicia Baumgardner on that list if you wanted to. You can, obviously, you have to put Fundora on that list. Michaela Mayer. But outside of that, I think every other fighter, there's very good fighters, but I'd say those are kind of like the most notable fighters in women's boxing. Yoka Valle, for me, is right up there, but I think for some, you could put her in that other half. Where do you kind of see her amongst those fighters?
I mean, at the moment, it's kind of it's tough because there is some eye test because we don't always know the opponents, but it feels like they're top ranked opponents that on the eye test I could see that Viddal knew what she was doing. So I think that she's in the conversation with any of them right now, and I think she's got the most upside.
Well, and I think that, like, here's the tough thing. I'm all about, like, okay, who she fought, eye test. Well, she's an undisputed champion. So, I mean, like, part of it is, like, I get that to a lot of people, the women's divisions aren't as strong as the men's divisions. And there is some argument to that. There are divisions that lack depth, and maybe an undisputed title in some divisions might not, to some people, hold the same meaning. That being said, if undisputed was so easy in women's boxing, why is Fundora the first ever undisputed flyweight champion? And also, how did she do it at 22? I believe she's 22, very young. That to me kind of moves her beyond an eye test. Is she's doing things other people have never done, and she's doing it at an age where we don't traditionally see people do this.
Absolutely, and I think that there's also there's some size factor too. I mean, if we look at like Claressa Shields' biggest fights, I think there would probably be Savannah Marshall, and what would be the other one? Maybe Hannah Gabriel's.
I think in the pro debut was a pretty exciting fight for a lot of people, but that was an in the know matchup. But that was a pro debut on an Andre Ward undercard, and I think that was very exciting to a lot of people.
Right. But I think that there also have been some fights like, it's not no discredit to her, but Danielle Perkins was not like the biggest name, but it was somebody who was ranked and was the top woman of whatever the belt they were fighting for. And that's who Claressa fought. And Gabriela is going to have to do some of that.
And I think the other thing for her is women's boxing, for hook or by crook, lacks knockouts traditionally. And she can set a lane for herself being the fighter that's stopping people. Getting stoppages in women's boxing is notable. And I think that alone could separate her from a lot of other fighters as I'm the women's boxer that's getting consistently stoppages. And she's starting, in my opinion, to put herself in that position.
That was part of the appeal of Sinisa, right? Was like, not that she was getting knockouts every fight, but she would have these real like highlight reel moments. And when you have moments like that, it doesn't always matter who it's against because you're creating that, you know what I mean? That excitement.
Yeah. So I think that's her thing. The code.
I have a genuine question for you because like I'm looking at the top 10 of that weight class on BoxRec. Do you know any of these fighters? Like, do you know who Angelina Lucas is?
I don't. Like, do you want me to look on BoxRec right now to see how many I know?
I mean, this is gonna make me look bad. Cecilia Rodriguez is.
I mean, this is the problem, right? They're all well-accomplished fighters. They've all had interesting lives. I'm sure they each have great stories. We don't want to diminish from that. But at the same point, we're not familiar. So the world or
we
the
just
US.
haven't seen them.
Yeah, and we haven't. There isn't a huge investment in women's boxing. So when I'm looking over the division, I only recognize one name in the division. No, I recognize two names. Arlie Musino, I've seen fight, and Louisa Houghton used to be on 360 Boxing Promotions cards back in the day, and she had some wins and some losses, but she was on those Superfly cards that Loeffler would put on. So those are the only two. And honestly, those two have had more of like a workman-like career than like a Hall of Fame. So I don't know the depth of the division that well. Let's transition over to Charles Conwell, our guy, Big Conwell. He lost his fight. It's sad to see. My first thoughts on this can happen when you're one fight away from a title. You keep fighting all those tough guys and people go, okay, who's Conwell gonna fight next? And some nights you're not as motivated or you're a little flat and it's the lottery ticket for that other guy and you just live a nightmare. And to me, it just, I do think, and I might be biased, Conwell probably perceptionally, or his perception of the fight was, these are glancing, slapping, shoe shining shots. These are not damaging blows that are going against me. I do think in his mind, he got into a pattern of these punches aren't hurting or effective, so I can take them to try to get my stuff. But that's how he ended up getting outworked to a split decision. What were your thoughts, Dakota?
I just thought Perez did a really good job of anytime there was any air or space between them, he just knew his range and when to let his shots go. And it got to a point where it felt like Conwell was doing everything he could just to smother the fight, but he was also then kind of smothering his own work. I got to be honest. I think we were surprised by this one, right? Like that's kind of the beauty of boxing sometimes is you don't see a thing coming and fights play out in ways that you don't expect. But you have to, for me, I have to give the credit to Perez for showing up for the moment and coming in with a really good game plan, because Conwell, if you give him the right range and you let him work in that mid range, he's going to make it uncomfortable for you. He's going to make it really fucking uncomfortable for you. And it just felt like he had a really strong game plan. He looked super composed and relaxed. And I was just really impressed by, him being able to make a fighter that sharp and that competent, look a little lost at times.
I agree. I think it was a weird fight too, because Garcia Perez is a slapper. He slaps with his shots, and he's a guy that's going to throw a lot of punches, and he's not going to always sit down on those shots. And I think the combination of that, the combination of Conwell, to me, just looked flat. His mind didn't look all the way in this fight. And it kind of looked like a fight where I wouldn't say Conwell was too patient, but he was waiting for the fight to turn into his favor. So he's like, okay, I've been in with these friggin' guys before. When am I going to get mine? And he never was able to separate, because this guy, I think, never slowed down. I think Charles was waiting on him slowing down in that second half. And if anything, he picked it up a little.
I think he did pick it up. I think that in many ways, he just kind of had his number on this one. And I don't know if that happens every time they get in the ring, but on this one, it just seemed like he knew the range to punch at, and Conwell looked a little uncomfortable with the size difference and wasn't sure where he got his.
Golden Boy undercard. Let's get through the undercard. It was an okay undercard. Tristan Calaruth, okay decision over Felix Valera. That was a very cautionary fight. We had talked about it. Ruslan Abdullayev is someone that Oscar De La Hoya is very high on. He believes he could be in a world title fight soon. He's now 2-0. not to be a negative Nancy, he's a solid fighter, but I mean, he's in an 8-round fight against Gino Rodrigo. The lazy comparison I think people will do is, oh, he's going to be fast-tracked like Lomachenko. Loma was fighting a different tier of opposition. Abduliev, very talented, but I think he's more of like a Keyshawn Davis or a Shakur Stevenson type prospect where you need about 12, 13 fights before a title fight, which is a very good prospect. But I just feel like when you get a fighter from Eastern Europe in that region and they're being advanced to 8 rounds, people are just going to prematurely throw out Lomachenko. That's just a Lukey observation. Do you want me to keep cooking on the undercard, or do you want me to stop?
I thought Ruslan Abdullayev was really impressive. I agree basically with what you're saying, though. It's a little tough on a second pro fight. I thought Rodrigo, we've seen him before. He went the distance with Elvis Rodriguez. He's been in with some guys. We kind of know his mettle. And I thought that Abdullayev was really disciplined and really tough to hit. He's a really good defensive fighter. I think maybe the Lomachenko comparison's a little heavy-handed, but I think MJ Akhmadaliev kind of comes to mind.
That's who he reminds me of. Is
also kind of
someone
a Uzbek fighter, you know what I mean? Like, I think it could be that type of a pace. And again, MJ's a very accomplished guy, only 14 fights. So I think that this guy could be moving in that direction as well.
He strikes me as a 9-10 fight guy that could be in a title eliminator and best case scenario title fight if the division was a little thin. And that's no knock. But he's someone that I think is going to get a heavy promotional push. Joel Iriarte, first-round knockout. Pretty much checking all the boxes you want of just a really exciting, fan-friendly young fighter. Staying active, exciting style. Really reminds me a lot of a young Jose Ramirez, if I'm being honest. He just has a lot of the traits that Jose Ramirez was really good at. And I love the fact that he's not taking holidays. He's just staying in there. Our guy, Alex Gvozdyk, 3rd-round knockout. Love to see him back. I'm actually going to be talking to him this week. And Joshua Edwards gets a 2nd-round knockout over Larry Gonzalez on the undercard. That is the 2024 super heavyweight U.S. Olympian. Anybody that you thought was like a stellar undercard guy?
I think the ones that really stood out to me were Abdullayev, for the most part. And I think Gvozdyk is another really interesting addition to light heavyweight just because we already have some sense of him. And I think I think he's so much better than a stepping stone. But there are guys that I would love to see him in with to kind of see where they're at. And I would also love to see, like, I think him and Callum Smith is a great fight. And whoever wins that fight is like legitimately a top 5 guy worthy of a shot. He's yet, in my mind at least, he's yet to give us a performance that doesn't indicate, that he's not a top guy.
It's kind of strange, right? He's a former title holder, but I feel like there's a subsection of fans that look at him as a journeyman. And he arguably could be one of the best guys in the division, yet he's never talked about as, here's a guy that could really beat anybody on any given night. And when Benavidez had a hard fight with him, people go, oh, I'm worried about Benavidez's temperament. Maybe he's just wants to spar. How about this? Maybe he's really good at boxing and he changes your demeanor in the fight because he lands clean and accurate punches to the point where you start having to spar the guy because that's your best course to victory.
And he stays engaged in fights he's losing.
That's a big one. He doesn't lose his will to win. He doesn't just check out.
He won the last 3 rounds of a fight he was having very little success in up to that point.
I mean, I just think that, like, people forget when he fought Beterbiev, and I got to always tell myself this, Lukey, forget that's 6 years ago. Most of these guys, 50% of the people watching boxing on YouTube, they didn't watch those fights. So I really shouldn't get mad because at least 50 to 60% of the people didn't watch these fights or don't care. Beterbiev was the underdog. Gvozdyk was the favorite going into that fight. And the minute he lost to Beterbiev, it was like he retired and people completely forgot about him. But he had a fight that worried me when Tommy Karpinski buzzed him. And I was like, I don't know about this guy. But then the way he elevated fights, Adonis Stevenson, and once again, I apologize for the listeners. They enjoy it. But for those people, a lot of them, they weren't watching boxing when this happened. And I think that's the problem with Gvozdyk. He's from an era where there were all these interesting fighters. And this is going to transition to something. You had Lomachenko, Golovkin, Sergey Kovalev, who retired over the weekend, and Gvozdyk. He was the most, and I hate to say it, uninteresting of the bunch. He was the most, he didn't have a catchphrase. He didn't have the dominant power consistently. He was the guy that kind of just fell into the back. And our guy Usyk, for most of Usyk's career, he was just an afterthought. People never thought of Usyk.
Right. I think ultimately he did kind of get overshadowed by a bunch of guys that really became superstars. But there's also the longevity element where it's like when I've watched him recently, I still see a guy that's a guy. And with the exception of Usyk, a lot of those fighters are not around or relevant or active anymore. Let's
sum up Sergey Kovalev's career.
Well, can you tell me what happened in the fight? I had no, I didn't remember that fight was even happening.
I can, but I was actually pulling up the notes to pull it up, and I was hoping
because I was looking on BoxRec earlier today, and it didn't have the results, so I don't know if he won. I have no context for how that went down.
See, I believe he got a knockout over Arthur Mann. I believe he did. Sergey Kovalev, Arthur Mann result. Yeah, he got a seventh round victory, seventh round stoppage, farewell victory. Kovalev is like kind of you had to be there to experience it. The context of Kovalev's career, probably similar to maybe like a guy that we had heard about that we revere, but maybe some won't. John the Beast Mugabe, where like you hear about how ferocious he was and how scary he was, but then if you've seen the Marvin Hagler fight, then like you just don't quite get it. And I feel like Kovalev ran into Andre Ward and his boogeyman persona was completely diminished. And that added to the luster of Ward's career was he went against one of the most fearsome punchers of his era and basically destroyed his boogeyman persona. But up until that point, he was one of the most fearsome punchers I had seen. I watched a lot of his early career on NBCSN. Jolene Mazzoni matched his fights on main event cards. Main events had that deal. He moves over to HBO. It's HBO with, we've got the Eastern Europeans are coming. We had Lomachenko, Kovalev, Golovkin. And then we had this guy, Chocolatito. That was the last wave of HBO boxing right after Floyd. And I feel like Kovalev, for a good portion of that part, was up there with Golovkin. He might not have had the fanfare, but he was a big part of the last decade of HBO's broadcasting.
And I still maintain that I think he was the most vicious puncher out of all of them. You know, the way he was getting knockouts with these weird little like chippy shots. You barely saw him coming. I mean, he was truly a destructive and devastating guy. I'm still one of those people. I thought he beat Ward the first time. I thought the second time he got hit with a low blow and they called it a knockdown, and it is what it is, and that's boxing. I'm not feeling sorry for the guy, but it did kind of feel like that big moment didn't it not just that it didn't go his way. I think it wound up influencing a lot of the rest of his career ultimately. And it's tough to, the chicken or the egg part. Is it the lifestyle? What led to the lifestyle? We've heard all kinds of things about Kovalev through the years and his partying and whatever. But I think that invincibility thing got stripped in that second fight specifically. Not as much in the first one, but definitely in the second one. And then by the time Elite or Alvarez got to him and stopped him, even though Kovalev won the rematch in very impressive fashion, it was like the jig is up, kind of. Like you can get to this guy. This is somebody, if you really step to him, it's not the same immovable force it once was.
When Andre Ward fought Alexander Brandon, once again, I'm apologizing for those that don't remember that fight. I was part of a media scrum to interview Sergey Kovalev. My takeaway, this dude's got huge hands. Like, I just remember looking at his hands during the interview. and he has pretty good sense of humor. He made himself like a slider. They had like a luncheon, and he like just made himself a slider. And I remember watching him try to eat the slider, and it's like a catcher's mitt on like a small item. And like he has a good sense of humor, but then like at times he doesn't. So it's like he has like this weird beat to interviewing him, because sometimes he's joking and sometimes he's not joking at all. And it's tough to understand which is which. And that's what I'll always remember about Kovalev, is like, he's a real fighting man. And I remember seeing him, and like a lot of people were intimidated by Kovalev. A lot of people were intimidated by him, because it's like during that era, those real punchers have a level of intimidation that are different than other guys. But Ward had an intimidating presence too. But I remember Kovalev at that time, it's like he went to Oakland to a Ward fight in his Kovalev shirt and the Kovalev jacket. And he was there to prove a point. And that's kind of the Kovalev thing is, did Kovalev even have a home region in America? He was kind of a road warrior. He would go wherever they asked him. He didn't really build a fan base per se, but he was more than willing to knock you out wherever.
I also think Kovalev and Adonis Stevenson was one of the great fights that never happened. Like there was this couple year period where they were just so stand out from the rest at light heavyweight, and they kind of danced around each other. And I think that was a real missed opportunity for some legacy shit.
And full circle, who ended up beating Stevenson? Well, it should have been Badu Jack, but then it ended up being Alexander Gvozdyk, which then led into Archer Beterbiev, which leads into the modern era of that division.
Yeah.
Wasn't that cool that we just did that? I have an esoteric question for you, Dakota. It's not the meaning of life or anything. Are you ready for it?
Hit me, bro.
How much should we care about Conor Benn-Chris Eubank Jr.?
Yeah, I've been kind of trying to figure that out. I can only speak for myself. I'm sure there's a lot more interest in this fight if you have an attachment, not just to them two guys, but to their dads. And frankly, their fathers were a little before my time. And I'm also not British. And so those are not sports figures that were, central in my boxing experience. And neither have these two guys. Do I think it's a decent matchup? Sure, I think it's a decent matchup. But it's a guy in Ben who isn't really fighting at his natural weight. We don't really even know what his natural weight is anymore, because his career has kind of been so in flux since all of the drug testing stuff. And, with Eubank, he's been really hit or miss at times, bro. Like, the Liam Smith fights are a perfect example of that. He gets kind of walked through on that first one, and the second one, he's with Bomac. He looks like $1 million, but he's always been a little bit unpredictable and a little bit inconsistent, a little bit Chavez Jr. like. And I would say my interest in this fight is mild to moderate, because I don't even know where they plan to campaign and what other fights would be of interest to them outside of, this British lineage rivalry.
I want to apologize for being very American on this topic, but the context of this fight goes over my head. I'm aware of the legacy.
But Lukey, we're also not talking about like a Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, right? We're not talking about Carl Froch and Joe Calzaghe, and like where it's like really two of the best guys going. You know what I mean? It's not that.
Well, their dads were arguably that, and their dads helped reshape British boxing. And I think that the fight is just as much for fans of our age as it is for 50 and 60-year-old men who grew up watching Train Spotting and a lot of these things, Guy Ritchie films, and watch VHS go to DVD, and from DVD go to this and that. And this is a callback for them to get their kids over and go, let's watch this fight of the dads that I used to watch. Let's watch their kids fight. It's the second generation of this thing. The problem is neither Eubank Jr. or Conor Benn have had a distinguished pro career. It's much more a novelty act of these are the sons of famous boxers who are endeared in Britain. And Conor Benn has had a lot of controversy around his career. And Chris Eubank Jr., like you said, has resembled more Chavez Jr. than his father. He's been a very up and down guy. It's clear he trains hard. That's a clear thing, but it just doesn't seem like he's able to put it together. Seems like
and by the way, though, I do think they're both very good fighters. It's not exclusively a novelty act by any means. They're both very much high level qualified professionals, but it's not a generational matchup in terms of, athletically in the same way that their dads were.
I mean, what it is it's basically a money match. It's something that will grab casual interest and appeal to people, but I don't, like you said, I don't even know the context of what this fight means. Does the winner go on to fight to rematch the guy that they beat? Do they have title aspirations? Neither have won a title. Do they have aspirations of winning one of the 4 major belts? Does that matter? At what weight will they campaign after this fight? None of these things. It really feels like it exists in its own time and space.
Well, I think it's for a very specific scene. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people all around the world that said, who's going to watch Jake Paul and Mike Tyson? I think that there are matchups that have the audience that they're drawing is going to be very diehard. And the same with Ryan Garcia and Rolly Romero, where obviously both tremendous fighters, right? But they're both coming, Rolly's coming off a loss. Ryan is coming off all of his various challenges and what have yous, you know what I mean? But that's a bigger fight than the sum of the parts, at least for a certain type of American audience that's on the internet that likes to watch little sparring footages. You know what I mean? It's got its own.
Well, I get what you're saying, but I think you can make the case that for Rolly, he's a former title holder, even if you don't like how he got it. And Ryan Garcia had a win over Devin Haney that was overturned. Those are consequential wins. Conor Benn has had a suspension followed by 2 average performances, so average that I don't even remember who he fought. Can't remember the first one. I think he fought Pete Dobson in his second fight. I'm not even sure if he fought since. And Eubank Jr., I know he fought Camille Zatameda, and I know that he lost to Liam Smith and he won. But they just don't seem to, like, if Eubank was in the middleweight division, shouldn't he be fighting Janibek? But now he's super middle. Like, I mean, these guys are guys that are not even being brought up in title pictures. And that's kind of the
right.
We're not saying, oh man, this guy's fighting it. Boots Ennis needs to fight Conor Benn. That's a compelling like, we laugh about it, but we're not thinking these things, and we're a hardcore boxing fan. I'm going to say it again. I've said it on British pods. It's hard for me to imagine this being a good fight. They're going to just talk trash all week.
It's a neighborhood scrap, bro. That's really what it is. It's a neighborhood scrap. It's the highest level of a neighborhood scrap. You know what I mean? The pops had a fight at the barbecue back in the day, and now the Sons are bringing it back. You know what I mean?
They're bringing it back, but correct me if I'm wrong, and you tell me if I'm just an old head for thinking this way. I think it's very difficult with all this trash talk to have a fluid performance, to just be able to go into the ring and execute and let your shots go. I think this is going to be a very tentative fight. There might be moments where they have it, but I think both are going to be very, very cautious to not get knocked out. I think that this is going to be a fight with a lot of buildup, but because of the trash talk and the egos and the pride, I think it's going to be very hard for them to have a relentless fight.
Yeah, I think there's potential that there's a lot of holding, right? There's a lot of big swings that miss and fall into a clinch, and I could see a lot of that. Conor Benn has not been particularly active over the last few years, and frankly, neither has Eubank. I mean, neither of these guys have been lighting up the schedule. And in my memory, I mean, I feel like Eubank's biggest win is probably against James DeGale, and that was a long time ago.
And that was also a diminished James DeGale. That's not the
Sure.
DeGale that was the one that didn't DeGale beat Andre Durrell.
Yeah, you know, and DeGale was a tremendous fighter, but that's a whole other era that we're talking about, and he just hasn't been a part of high level, elite, relevant boxing in a long time.
Okay, so we got a British fan. Will says, I'm British and I'm still not a fan of this fight. It's just being done for money. I would have preferred them to pursue more meaningful fights in their division. So I think basically all the hardcore fight fans worldwide view this as Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson, but more in a professional boxing realm. But there's a huge casual interest in Britain to see this fight. So the fight's being made because it reignites fans that want to see the matchup.
Did Chavez Jr. and Camacho Jr. ever fight? Do you remember?
I can't remember.
I feel maybe I'm making that up that they did, but I don't remember if that was a good fight or if it was successful or not. But this is probably the most notable version of like this. The Sons Are Gonna Fight reboot, because there have been a couple versions.
Yeah, I mean, this is, but to me, I mean, my level of interest is very low in this one. I'm not excited. I think that I favor Conor Benn slightly because he's more of a, what I'd say, more of a professional fighter at this point. He, like, even though he's had his lulls and whatever, seems like he's at least kind of gone a more traditional boxing path when he was going. Chris Eubank is kind of stop and start, and fights are here and there. And I can't trust Chris Eubank. It's more inconsistent. Conor Benn doesn't blow me away, but at least there's a level that I know that he shows up at. What do you think? And also, I should say, Ben is moving up in weight to Eubank's weight, essentially.
Yeah, I think I lean Eubank, to be honest with you. I think there's a pretty massive experience gap here in terms of fighting at a certain level. We can say a lot of different things about Chris Eubank, but he's fought many of his contemporaries with mixed results, right? Not exclusively bad results, mixed results. And so I feel like though he's been a little inconsistent, at his best, we know that can yield pretty exciting results. Whereas with Conor Benn, anything he's done, at least his best work was done at a lower weight, right? Like the Chris Algieri fight's probably his best fight, and Chris was far past his best days. And so I think him moving up to fight a much naturally bigger guy, not having been real active and not blowing me away the last couple of times, I think at least to me, it feels like everything is in Eubank's favor.
So the majority of the world thinks like you, which is scaring me. I'm the only one that's saying Conor Benn that I've talked to amongst the smart boxing guys. But when I look at the matchup, that's just the way I see it. But
you got to think about this too. There's no chance Conor Benn's ever fought somebody that hits that hard. And I'm certain that Eubank has fought multiple guys that hit harder than Conor Benn.
Yeah, to me, it's like they're neither strike me as a generational fighter. So when you don't have a generational fighter, the weights aren't going to be, at least in my head, this is going to be more of a sparring session than a fight. And I just see Ben as like closer to his prime, essentially, even though he's given up the weight. But that's just the way I look at it. Let's go to what I Just Want the Truth is asking us. One of the undercard fights that stands out to him, he wants to know our take on Viddal Riley versus Chev Clarke. And that's a very good matchup. What do you think, Dakota?
Unfortunately, I don't know anything about Viddal. I definitely a big Chev Clarke fan, though. And I know that he had a loss himself recently and then came back, had a pretty nice win. Always love watching some Chev Clarke. And I think that
Riley was with Mayweather Promotions. He's built himself up. He's a cruiserweight, and he's built a strong British following. And a lot of people have really started to get behind him over there. And I think that there's always been questions around how much talent is there. He's kind of like a guy where he's developing a following, but is the talent going to match? And to me, Chev Clarke, the talent is clear. It's just like sometimes he's a tough guy that wants to do tough things. My perception going into this is Chev's going to win because there's something about Chev that to me really stands out, and he seems like a notable top tier fighter. To me, he's a guy that I just really think. I don't think, like, a lot of times when I tell people, oh, I like this guy, they don't know what I always like. Sometimes I like a guy that's a shotgun. He just blows up doors, you know. He might not be jabbing 50, 100 times or whatever. To me, if you're asking, I just want the truth. I think Viddal, Riley versus Chev Clarke. I think Chev is probably going to stop him.
Well, I wouldn't put it past him. I've enjoyed every time I've seen him. I remember that last fight with Mosqueda. That was a bit of a classic. And it just seems like he's the kind of guy that can bring a lot of excitement to the cruiserweight division, both with his exciting style and with his willingness to take challenging fights.
Here's another good one that I really, really like on this card. Are you ready for this fight? Liam Smith versus Aaron McKenna. I think this is going to be the second best fight on the card. McKenna is one of those guys that I think could be one of those new faces in the division. But Liam Smith, man, zombie Liam Smith won't go away. You think you've got him, and he's still breaking down the door to eat some brains. What are your thoughts on this matchup?
You know, I would have to at least lean towards McKenna just because it's been a long time since Liam Smith has been in the ring. He's a guy, you know, well into his 30s, a lot of tough fights. But like you said, he is a bit of a zombie. It's a little tough to put him out of his misery, and he's always seemed to have one more trick up his sleeve. So it wouldn't blow my mind if he won this fight either.
Ken, I think there's something special about McKenna, so I think McKenna should win this. The big thing with me about Smith that I love is the punch volume. He's a guy that, like, especially when you take that jump up in talent, a lot of guys aren't used to facing people that throw punches, a lot of punches, and he is someone that is quite comfortable letting his hands go.
Yeah, and throws in combination, did it against Canelo Alvarez. You know, in a fight he was so outclassed in, and yet there they were, Canelo against the ropes, and Liam Smith's letting his hands go. So, like I said, he's always had one more trick up his sleeve, and I'm just not sure what he's got left in the tank, but he's just been a quality operator for so long, man.
Okay, next one is I think this is the fight of the night. This might be the fight of the year. Are you ready for me to overhype a fight? Chris Billam-Smith versus Brandon Glanton. I personally think Brandon Glanton's probably going to win by knockout. These are two guys that run into each other.
That's an action fight right
there. This is if you want to watch a fight on Saturday, this is the one to watch. This honestly, to me, should be the main event. This has the makings of being one of the best fights of the year.
Totally, and I actually really like the third fight between Lyndon Arthur and Anthony Yarde, having split the first.
We're gonna get there.
Well, I'm already there. Even though I love the Chris Billam-Smith and Brandon Glanton fight, I feel like, you know, it's rare that we get a good trilogy.
Okay, so why do you like the Lyndon Arthur matchup?
Well, in general, I've really enjoyed Anthony Yarde's career over the years. It hasn't been perfect, but he's a guy that's kind of always shown up to win and overachieved to some extent with maybe some of his limited amateur experience. And, you know, they split the first two fights. Yarde won in the second one by knockout. And, you know, as tough as his last couple of fights have been, there was parts of Lyndon Arthur's performance against Bivol that I was impressed with, just that he made it the full way. He showed some resourcefulness. And I think that, you know, it's easy to overlook a guy because he loses to maybe the best fighter on the planet. But I think it is two legit top 10 guys, two quality guys, and definitely two of the best British light heavyweights.
So for me, I'm not as into that fight, but I love Anthony Yarde. I think he's good for British boxing, and I think his personality really moves things. I think Lyndon Arthur had one of those great performances and isn't ever going to match that. For me, I just hope Anthony Yarde kind of has a stellar performance, but that's actually not to be contrarian. I'm not very excited about that fight, but I like seeing Yarde. I love the Glanton Billam-Smith fight. To me, that's the best fight on the card. That's the stellar matchup. That's the one we'll be talking about.
Yeah, it's two real dogs.
Well, it's two like-minded guys. Brandon Glanton's a guy that gave me a quote where he said his game plan isn't ever to win a fight. It's to give as much damage to his opponent as possible, and winning would be a byproduct. And you have Billam-Smith, who goes forward and tries to outwill each other. I mean, this feels like this could be a fight where both get knocked down. I do have concerns with the way CBS took punishment in the Zordo fight. Coming back against one of the heaviest hitters in the division, little concerning for me.
It's definitely a little concerning, but and that was a lot of punishment he took. There's no doubt that was a lot of punishment he took. But he has been in with multiple top 10 guys. Not to say that Glanton hasn't fought some really tough guys, but Chris Billam-Smith has, he's got the Riakporhe win, he's got the Akoli win. There's multiple kind of high level wins where he's kind of gotten himself over the hump.
Well, that's basically our show. Go in the chat right now if you want to give us some questions. One other rumor floating around on the internet, and that always means it's true, is that Shakur Stevenson no longer, or people are reporting or alleging that Shakur is no longer with Matchroom, and he will be on a one-off deal for his next fight with Lou DiBella. That himself and his manager have acquired the services of Lou DiBella to promote his next fight. Sounds like he'll be more of a free agent. What does that mean to you, Dakota, even though this is unsubstantiated and all that?
Well, I'd have to see hard proof of that, and I'm just not sure. I've been a big fan of Lou DiBella, and I've watched a ton of his fights. I'm a Broadway boxing kid. You know what I mean? I've eaten more bowls of cereal at a Broadway boxing than fucking anybody. But I'm just not sure what a regional promoter like that could do for somebody like Shakur Stevenson, who seems like he's on the doorstep of a super fight. I
think it would just be like working as a broker. So I think, big fights.
So it wouldn't be like Shakur Stevenson at Sony Hall.
No, I think it would be
Right.
Lou would be helping logistics for very big fights with Shakur.
Well, then that's a great addition.
I don't think it would be building the regional. I think Lou would come to help with the
Gotcha.
With the big events to help on his behalf.
I think that's a great addition to his team.
Shakur's got a very strong team. Any other news and notes that stood out to you this week?
I don't. We didn't really touch on it too much, but I thought that Dalton Smith beating Matthew German was a decent win. I've been liking Dalton Smith for a long time. I've been impressed with him generally. He's perfect by no means, not perfect by any means, but I think that he's a real guy. And if he's not going to fight it, I always say better to stay active against somebody I know you're going to beat than not at all. But I think it's worth mentioning at least that card happened.
Yeah, I mean, Dalton Smith. Well, Dalton Smith. It just seems like I think the one takeaway I had was he was having trouble cutting off the ring. How do you think he does with Albert Puello if he's in there with Mr. Puello?
I mean, again, it's funny because we sort of feel opposite about those two fighters, right? Like you've thought that Puello was a top guy for a while now. Anytime I've seen Puello, basically, I felt like he lost. And so it's been tough for me to get excited about him. I would lean towards Dalton Smith on that one. But at the end of the day, Puello also has more of that hands-on experience against the best of the best. And it's tough to know when he applies that physicality to somebody like Dalton Smith, can he handle it?
It's a good question. That is the show for this week. Did
we lose him right at the end? That's crazy.
Where can people support you?
Okay, he's back. Well, you can always support me at the Slip and Weave podcast at ITR Boxing. You can always watch me with my guy, Big Dog Lukey. And shot a piece today with Price Taylor that I'm hoping will be out in the next couple of weeks, and check that out once it's out.
Okay, that's great. We will be back. Maybe even a Saturday show after the telecast. Who knows? We might even do a little Saturday show to try to get those UK viewers. Who knows what we are, but we will be back. And thank you, Will, for saying thanks. And we will be back. Take care, guys.